An event is not over until everyone is tired of talking about it. So, good evening, everyone. My name is Persh, and I'm the host for today. Today, we are having our eighth day of MERN Stack Boot Camp with our prestigious mentor, Ms. KSK Azuddin, sir. A very warm welcome to you, sir. Mr. SK Azuddin, sir, is a mentor, full stack developer, broadcaster, and a freelancer. Before moving to the today's session, I would like to give a quick glance about the previous session, which was about the front end with React. So first of all, we did the introduction to the React, which is a free and open source front end JavaScript libraries. We learned about different libraries versus what's the difference between library and a framework. Then we created a project folder, which was done by a command, which was npx create -react -app my app. This will create the folder structure and install all the required packages. So some key points were been told by sir, which was that use lowercase when we are creating a project name. Then inside the project folder, a public folder is created, which is a static folder when which contains static elements. Source folder contains the app code which we are going to use when we are developing an app. So I invite on the behalf of whole team, Mr. SK Azdurin sir, to please continue with the eighth day of learning. Stage is all yours, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Spursh. It was a really warm welcome. It seems like people are still coming and the number is going higher and higher and higher. Let's see how many people are there. Okay, so let's begin with some queries if you have any till now, like regarding React and so on. Even you can ask from Node if you're still working on Node. And then we'll hop off with more informations. Okay, not much queries. Good students. Okay, so today we'll be, there are a lot of things that we need to discuss on React, but you know, the major thing that I had faced yesterday, like someone asked Shakib, and one of them also supported, sir, can you give me an introduction to Redux? Of course, we'll come to the short of introduction on Redux, but before that, of course, we'll come to that. We will come to that, Utkarsh. Okay, so yesterday we got a query, like suppose the document regarding the documentation, like most of you or maybe some of you might not have been through the documentation ever, or maybe you know reading documentation is not a cup of tea for some of them or maybe most of them. So like how we can learn the terminologies, how we can understand by reading the documentation, and that how that becomes the most fundamental stuff right here if you are learning something new. Okay, so that's why I decided to go with the documentation. Like today, we'll be going with the documentation. Now, till now, what I used to do is I used to explain all of this with code and with the theory knowledge and everything. But today, what we are going to do is we are going to understand the document. We are going to the flow with the documentation. Like maybe wait, let me not now, let me just share the screen and show you like how we can learn from the documentation, how we can understand those terminologies, and if we are not getting something, then where we can find it, right? So let's learn all of these things from the documentation. And again, not only the documentation, from the documentation flow we'll also be coding and understand all of those fundamental concepts while coding. So let's begin. Okay, perfect. So yesterday we went through this only, right? Like hello world, and then we skipped to something like components and props, and we also had covered rendering elements yesterday. But today we'll go a bit more deeper, as in, uh, yeah, okay, as in what are all of these things. Of course, we would have come up with all of these things one by one, but it seems like now we have to understand like how we can learn all of these things via documentation moreover. So how it defines, like whenever you are going to any tech which you want to learn, there is always something called docs. So in docs you will get all of these things, but again the getting started and everything is there. We had already covered this, we are not going to cover this today. Let's go to the main concept and see how it defines. Okay, so this render, we had covered this yesterday. What render does, like it basically converts your HTML and render this to the DOM, to the HTML DOM. And knowledge level assumption. Okay, introduction JSX. Okay, so this is highly needed, I guess. So JSX is basically, this time what we are going to learn is, of course, JS. React is based on JS, but there is something called JSX, and we'll also come up with how this is, what is the difference between JS and JX. But to be honest, not much. So it simply says it's called JSX, and it is a syntax extension JavaScript. Remember this because this might come up to your interview, or maybe your any of your uh, Q&A sessions when you are going to give a short of a, like if you're going to prove your knowledge on React, then this might come up, what is JSX. So this is basically the syntax extension to JavaScript. Now, how this is going to work. So suppose if we write JS, then it's simple, right? Suppose you can, in the variable, you write something, you hold some data type, like suppose maybe string, or maybe the number or boolean or any data type, right? But this time when we are writing code in JSX, we can literally define, we can literally hold this particular HTML, and this is a valid code. This is a valid JavaScript because this is the extension of JavaScript. And how we code this, simply just like suppose when we are adding any folder, maybe this one, app.js, we can just rename this to something like app.jsx, and here we go. This becomes a JSX code. So that is how easy it is. JSX are yes, that defines. Okay, this is how you just simply code on this. Like suppose if this would have been JS, you cannot, let me just show you on light so you can understand this. So H1, not like that. And oh, right. So this is a valid code, but the moment you convert this to JS, I'm not sure this is going to take or not. We are not using React here anyway. Okay, this is going to take, because again we are working with React, so there are webpack handling all of these projects, with all of these structures and everything. That's why it's going to work, because behind the scene webpack is handling all of these things. But this is how JSX is defined. And why JSX? Because you are going to write HTML code into JavaScript. So that's why JSX is needed. We use JSX to write HTML code into JavaScript code. Like as we already had seen yesterday, we are returning this particular HTML code, which is not making any sense in JavaScript. But here it makes sense because we are using JSX behind the scene, and it is needed. And again, I went through these, and maybe 5-6 times I read literally, where while I was learning React, and when I was also learning the advanced and everything, then I went through this entire React documentation maybe 5-6 times, or maybe more than that, but not less than this. So just to understand the concepts and everything, this is not like that we read this once and we'll get all of these things. If you want to learn more deeper, you have to read it again and again. But this is not necessary, but just at least go through these at least once, so you will understand what this actually defines. Like later on, if you come up with something like JSX or something, you know where to find it. Now embedding expressions. So this is how we are going to do, like element, and we simply just send as we already did yesterday. And that is pretty much it. This is how we are going to define image and the strings and everything, of course. See this tab, it becomes tab index and all. This is also we are going to cover. So basically in here, like suppose you can also see here. So for example, yesterday we had already covered this. So here we go with the documentation. So here it's something like, for example, warning, JSX closer to JavaScript than HTML. React DOM uses camel cache property to naming convention instead of HTML attribute. Just try to understand this. We are not going to use HTML attributes directly. Like suppose tab index is the HTML attribute, like, but in JavaScript, like in JSX, what we are going to do, we are going to use camel case. Again, in JSX, we are going to use camel case for all the HTML attributes. Again, we are going to use in JavaScript extension. We are going to use camel case for all the HTML attributes. Here we go with the example. So tab index become tab index with I in capital, and class becomes class name. So these are, again, you will come up with all these specify children. Okay, okay. Image div. We are going to define all of these things. We already went through this. Rendering element. We have already went through this. Like I've showed you already. This is where we are going to render the entire project, and this is the method we call to render this entire project. And then we are moving forward. React updates. Yes, we are going to show a short of an example. This basically says it's like constantly updating. Like suppose there is a difference between like static website and web application. You can Google and learn more on this. But in basic, suppose this is a web page. Like suppose if this becomes a web page, and if you go to somewhere like tutorial, then the page takes some time to load and then goes on, right? But here, when you are in Java, when you are in a web application, then it doesn't need to be loaded. Like suppose community, if you tap on community, immediately you just go. It gives a sort of application feel. That's why we call it web app. But again, in deeper level, there are more functionalities, like how this is working and everything. If you want to know more about it, you should learn more deeper on this, like how web app works and all. But whenever we are creating something with React, we are going to create the web application, not a static website at all. That's why Java comes in, and why we call this libraries and frameworks are so powerful in these days. Components or props, we already went through this, but today we are going to dig a bit more. Like suppose, I don't know if they have example of this or not. We call it drilling, props and read only. No, maybe we come up with something more. Okay, here we go. Now, this was the topic we actually wanted to discuss. Before that, I think I got a query, and it seems like which is better, MVC or REST API? Hold on, what do you mean by MVC and REST API? Both of these are different. REST API is different, and MVC is basically model view controller. MVC is basically the project structure you want to make, and REST API is a totally different thing. Like the way we are going to make API, maybe with JSON or something, and the way we are still making with Node, that also we call REST API. So both of this terminology are a bit different. Okay, let's move forward. Now, states and lifecycle. Let's just run our project and clean a bit. Then we'll go more deeper on this. Come on, yes. Get, I guess I'm on the right directory. So as we already had discussed many times, the way we are going to run this project is simply npm start, and this is going to, like, the webpack is behind the scene. The webpack is combining everything and minifying all the codes and running everything to the local with hot reloading. Okay, so this is going to make a simple one. So just for understanding, and let's just understand these concepts and everything first, and let's go up, like, let's practice a bit, and then we can go ahead and create our components and everything, right? We can just go ahead and keep moving to the creating components and everything, but I don't think that is needed for now. Sub.taste is not needed, logo not needed, this is not needed, this is also not needed. These comments and all are literally booming our project. We don't need it. All we need is this much only. Okay, the CSS, we are going to destructure all of these things. Okay, perfect. Now it's working, and this already has opened our terminal. We can just, today we need this much. Okay, perfect. Now, suppose this state and life cycle is highly important when you are creating any big application where a lot of data, you are manipulating with a lot of data, like a lot of dynamic data. Like suppose, let's make something, let's delete this. We don't need this anyway. We can just, we can print this one here itself, and we can remove this. Now, suppose if we are defining something as in this constant name, right? So this is the username, and we are simply painting this here. Hello, Ayush. Now, what if we want to change it? Like suppose this should be changing as in if we consider this new date. So as we already have seen, so this is going to simply show us, oh, this should be to date string. Okay, here we go. But if this is by default, or maybe for any reason this is Ayush, and for a certain reason we want to change this to something like Dia, then how we can change it? Let's do it. So if we want to change it, then firstly we need to define this as in let, and then we can do this something like maybe username to something else like Dia, and so on, right? And again, these kind of manipulations are highly needed. Like this kind of work in if we are going to work with JavaScript, then this gets stuck. Okay, so this is how we are going to change right now. Suppose if we have something like set timeout, and here we are going to create a callback where we are going to set this username for maybe 5 seconds. So this is Ayush. Is it more or what? Oh, I don't need it. This is weird. Okay, let's just not play with it and make it more complex. Instead, uh, it's like suppose if there is username and we want to change it, the way we are going to change it in state management is they call it, mm, there are many more stuff actually. Okay. Again, you can go through all of their examples and everything, but what we are finding is their terminologies again. And why we are not following this particular code is they have class components, but we are working with functional components. Again, it's almost same, but still we are looking forward to the main stack. No, the state management has something they call hook. Oh, okay. They have separated this anyways. It's fine. So for state management, we are going to use hooks. Now, what are hooks? So hooks are the recent one, but the hooks literally helps you to manage the state. Like if, as they say, like they let you use a state and other React features without writing a class. So in state management, in the main concept, so there are a lot of things that you have to manage. But in here, what you need to do is just write this simple code, and that's all. The way we are going to do it is suppose import use state from React. And this is use state. The way it works is something like const name and set name. Oh, we could have done something much better. I just got the idea anyway. Now, this is the same constant. This should be name anyway. Now, this is the same constant where we were using. Like suppose this is the same thing, Ayush, right? But what is the set name? Now, if you want to update this, we can use the set name, but let's add something like maybe button. Oh man, button. And here we can change. And the way we are going to handle event is on click. And what happens on click is simply a callback where we get this event. And this event, and for this event, we are going to change. While clicking this, we are going to change the name. Like suppose maybe set name. Yes. So we are going to set name, and this set name should be Tia. Perfect. Now here we go. Now if we use something like the old one, maybe const user name. Oh, let's not just go back to that. Now let's understand how we are going to do it. This use state help us to manage the entire state. And now what is, oh, there are a lot of queries here. It would, if we use variable, maybe work, it would work. Okay, modification of class components. Variable, actually in JavaScript, we use variable rare. Like suppose even if you want to scope this, like if you want to keep it in the global scope or somewhere, we use let, not even where, because where literally, you know, make your variable more public. So at least let is good, but mostly we should be using constant. So again, if you want to learn more about it, you can go forward and learn like variable, var, let, and const, the differences and everything. And that is highly needed, of course. If still you don't have any idea on this, you should learn this, because these are just the advanced JavaScript which you should be curious about. Now, so this is the way we are going to use state, and all of these, like there are a lot of hooks they have. We are going forward with using one by one all of this. So use a state. If we can, okay, introducing, where is the hook? Yes, so here is the state, what are the states and everything, and their state is using state hooks. Okay, okay, so these are their hooks basically: use a state, use reference, and use context. So all of these we are going to use, and we are also going to use this, like some of them, but we are going to explain all of them, that how these are advanced hooks basically. So we are going to learn more of them. So this use state, let's go to use state, and what it says simply this, like for first state, which is going to be static one, and set state, which you with which you can just change this right away. So you can change it, like suppose if there is Ayush or something, and you can put some action and then just to change it. And like suppose if you make it in the static one, in the static website or somewhere, it is going to reload the page and everything, right? Because it literally hits a certain event in the browser, and this reloads the page. But this time it really doesn't. But again, this sometime it does. If you're going to fetch certain API or something, then it does. So there we have a sort of a code. Again, we are going to explain everything right here, but this is just how we are going to use a state. And again, there are more. Suppose if we are using something like maybe object this time, and this is the name of the object, and here what we are going to do is name dot name we are going to use, right? uh, or maybe we can explain a bit more. uh, Ayush, and there are more like Dia, which is Dia, right? Now, the state management does not always mean a string. You can literally hold it any kind of data type. Like if you want to hold this boolean, array, or object or anything, we are just trying to demonstrate how we can handle object, how we can handle boolean, how we can handle so on. So not this time. Okay, now this is Ayush and this is Dia. Now, suppose if you want to change Ayush to something else, then the way we are, okay, let's just put this in the another function, then we can explain this a bit more. Maybe handle change, and then we can explain this. Yes, and we can use this handle change function on click, and this is actually how we are going to use. We are not going to write this kind of a function inline, right? This is a basic HTML page that we are going to create, and all those function and everything we are going to write just above return and under this particular component scope. Now, and see, now it's so funny to see, like suppose this is HTML, but there are also JavaScript, but there are also objects and everything, and weird CSS. I know it's so weird, but trust me, you'll fall in love with this kind of syntax later on, because the way it works, the way it represents the entire functionalities, it's just awesome. Okay, now suppose this is handle change, right? Now we are setting this to Dia. Now we do it, this will change to nothing because now we are setting this to Dia, but this is an object. So please note here, use a state, the kind of data type you hold, this is going to keep. Like suppose if you are keeping maybe a string, and later on you want to set this name with certain object, this is not going to work. Again, note this, you can hold this. Suppose if the in constant, if you have worked with C or maybe C++ or maybe some more object oriented language, so you know this, we defined what kind of variable we are going to hold, and that is going to be static one. And some, we to make it dynamic, that's a lot of work anyway, but here this is working in the same, almost the same way. Suppose if this is name, and we are defining the name is going to be the object, then we cannot use this set name method to change this with string or maybe any other data type. This is not how it works. So the way it works is, you can just change this. So suppose if you want to change this, right, set name, then you can do maybe this, firstly the object, and then you explicitly you have to mention Ayush, and so Ayush change and Dia should remain. So, but what we can do it, we can just take the entire name object, which is this one, and we can put something like maybe Dia, and Dia is going to be maybe Dia changed. So this is how we are going to update only Dia. uh, okay, now this is the object, right? But we are going to change only Dia, not the entire object. We are going to change only the, not the entire object. So you would come up with certain scenarios where you don't need to change the entire state, you just need to change the one, you need to change only one. Then this is how we are going to do it. We are going to change on the Dia. Now if you just tap hello, Dia changed, and this remains the same. And this is how it works. And the same way we are going to work with arrays and boolean and so on, right? So, and again, let me show you one more thing here. uh, a sort of an inline style, which is going to be needed again. So I don't know in the documentation where they have styling guides, but styles. Oh, not seems like advanced guide. Now seems like, or maybe if there is, I am not able to find now. Let me just React JS CSS, and if they can, yes, a styling and this. Oh, oh, they, oh my goodness, they kept this on FAQ anyway. It's absolutely fine for them. So now see how we are going to learn this. Like I can show you just right away, but coding is not the ultimate scenario today. Today we are going to learn this from documentation and how we are going to. Like suppose if we are not getting anything on the documentation, or maybe there are certain things that we want to play with React and we are not getting. We can simply search those with on Google, and then of course there are certain scenarios. So styling and CSS, how do I add style in the components? And these are the documentations we are going to follow. So what this is, how they are going to use. So firstly, the class name we have been through many times. And okay, so they have also changed this class name dynamically. Like suppose the class name, and the class name also could be something like this, variable, short of a variable menu, but you are literally changing that class name in raw JavaScript, like with if conditions. So it's so easy, right? Like menu is already there, and you are simply adding, like the menu is going to be exist, a main menu is going to exist, and then you are just adding menu active if prop is active. So it's so simple to add with React because it helps to write the CSS and HTML with core JavaScript. If JavaScript is your favorite one, or maybe you if you're liking it, this is the right way of doing the same thing. And you see the docs and styling. Oh, they have some more API references, top elements. Oh, here we go with the style one. So they also have API references, elements. Okay, so this is Davis style, but the way they are going to style this. No, again the same thing, but okay. So this we can refer to. So simply style as we do in HTML also, but here this is something new. The way we are going to define is the way we are going to define inline CSS is again the core JavaScript short of, like suppose the 10 is not any string, or it is we have not even mentioned any pixel or something. We are just directly adding this, right? Like height 10, and that's it. And if you want to go with something like pixel, here we go with the example. You can put it always on a string, like string HTML, pixel, or EM or REM, whatever you want to use. So let's use some CSS code here. And again, CSS code, but dynamically. So we are going to add style. And this is how we are going to style, like suppose the background color, and I'm getting the references anyway. Background color, we can put something like gray. Is it going to work? No. Gray. Is it going to work? Yes, but no. Okay. So gray is not defined. No, we already have referred this. Why hot load is not working much. Okay. So here, this background color is gray, right? So it's so simple to write this, but we are going to make it more dynamic. And how we are going to do is, suppose now this name is not going to be the name. This might be going to be the background, right? And if we change that background, so we can also change this one to background. And note here, if the constant name is background, the uh, update name should be set, in the camel case, set background and be in capital, because you are going to follow all of these things. Now we can just remove this, and we can put this again to something like maybe Ayush, and this is gray, and we can hold the man is something like true, or maybe false, right? We could have used something else in the background, but it's fine. Now while handle change, what we are going to do is, like this time we are not going to handle certain object. What we're going to do is simply, if that is false, turn it to true, right? Now just try to understand if okay, so firstly, if this is false, then true, right? So let's just add if background is there. So this is short of a condition. We call it terminal, we call it something like black. Okay, so we call this kind of conditions as in ternary operations, ternary conditions. So it's very simple to write. If there is only one condition, like suppose if background is true, then gray, else black. So I wrote this inline CSS with this JavaScript. Like suppose, just note here, we are writing CSS here, but we have also integrated JavaScript. So again, these are just the terminologies that we are going to learn. JavaScript is so friendlier with HTML and CSS if we are writing code with JSX, right? So now if this is gray and black, now again, let's practice with Boolean. Like let's practice this state with Boolean. And the way we are going to handle with Boolean is, suppose handle change, right? Handle change is there. If we click this, then it becomes true. And then again, this is black. It's fine. Now again, if we press this again and again and again, this is not going to loop, right? But how we can do it? Then we can do something like background and simply an explanation. And how it's going to work is, if is it worked? Okay, so if this is background and this is the constant name, right? So now if this, but if suppose it's simply just changing this. Suppose if we have changed this to true, now this is true, right? But if you tap again, then this background is right now true, which is a state, which is in the state. We cannot see it in the code because the state is managing behind the scene just right here in the browser. And then if we change tap again, this is again going to be false. So true, false, true, false, true, false, true, false. This is how seamlessly this user state is going to manage your functionalities. And this is why some of the updated or the recent websites are being so easy to use, and the feel of using is so expensive. And you are also going to create some of them for your clients. So just learn through all of this so they get the right services from you. And if even if you're going to join somewhere, and moreover, of course, for your knowledge. So this is how we are going to work with a state. And again, for now, we just managed string and maybe the object and true and false, right? Now let's do one more thing, 0. And this is how we are going to manage, suppose B. And if we tap to this, something like maybe count F2, count, no, not like this, count, and this is also going to be count. Now this becomes count, and now we are going to handle numbers in state, right? Now set count. This is not how we are going to handle. And no, now this time not, we are not going to handle this in state. What we are going to, okay, so this background is not defined, and where this is coming from source. Now see, React is also very user friendly for debugging purposes. Now suppose this is literally helping you to understand, even in the browser, even on the console, like where this bug is coming from. Like background is not defined, it's simple to understand. And then where from line 7, and which file, source app.js. So we are already in source app.js, and the line number 7 is just right here. And the background is not defined. So just because it is hot reloading, we cannot use like it is always binding all of these codes and then printing on the browser. Then this kind of errors, we have to resolve it immediately. So let's just do it. For now, let's do nothing so that our everything goes print. And then okay, now we can change something like count is um, okay, now we have changed this to something like count is 0, right? And suppose if we want to increment this, like suppose a short of a counter or something, and how we can do it, we can simply add this set state as in count counter plus 1. the count, whatever there is, just plus one. 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. It's so easy to use, right? Now again, I think we have better syntax in JavaScript. But God, it's fine. Like count plus plus, and this count plus plus is not going to work. Okay, it's fine. Okay, so this is how we are going to handle with numbers. Maybe one, or maybe you can also put something like five. Every time this you tap it, it is just going to increase with five and five, but it's so clumsy to understand. Now again, let's understand how this is going to. So e dot default, this is something like event default. So this says if invoked when the cancelable attribute value is true, like this is simply defines if anyhow you put something in the pay in this fun in this method, something like maybe you are fetching API, or for any reason, if you are doing something which is out of this scope or anything, for certain reason this page gets reload. If this, for a certain reason, this page tries to reload, you are not going to let this page reload. That's why you write this on every button function. On click, firstly prevent default. So by default, this button is going to reload the page, but you are not going to let this page reload. React handle this all along, but again, for certain reasons, this happens. So you can just prevent this by this code, like e dot prevent default. Now we have successfully handled these kind of stuff. Now let's go a bit more deeper and let's understand more states right there. So what are more? So we went through all of these again to whatever we went through this. So now you know like the states and everything are like how we are going to manage these states, either that is any type of data type. Of course, we have not handled any array or something. We are going to do this in the future, and we are going to do any more advanced stuff. But again, for moving forward to advanced stuff, we are just trying to learn the basic fundamentals and how this is working behind the scenes, so we can move forward with the advanced one. Now, we learned user state. Now let's understand what is use effect. So use effect is basically accepts a function that contains imperative possibly a full mutations, subscriptions, timers, logging, and other side effects of not allowed. Use effect instead use effect. Okay, you can just go through these theories so you will understand much deeper level, but we have short time, so I'm not going line by line. I'm just going with the code by code. So this is the syntax of use effect, but let's understand what this actually does. Okay, now suppose use effect is a sort of like, this is a page, right? Now, if this page reloads, or if someone comes to this page, or maybe you click right here or something gets changed, like for any particular action, for any change, uh how can I explain this in a better way? They do not even have this in the advanced level. Guess this prop is there. Values effect depends on our example. No, this is not how we are going to use this. Subscriptions. Okay, so the use effect is basically for any changes, what action you want to take. Like suppose the moment this reaches 20, you want to convert this background black, right? Then how we can put this? Of course, there are conditions, but there is no listener, right? Like suppose you can check, suppose if there is 5 and if this count is more than 20, and then do something, right? But again, this is a static code, and there is a JavaScript thread which already went through this, right? The JavaScript thread is literally not listening, so there is no event listener here. But use effect literally helps us to add an event listener to our code. Let's understand how the use effect work. So this is a basic syntax, but no, this is not the way we are going to use this, because um, we can remove this. But okay, let's just write our own. So use effect, and use effect syntax is, but before that we need to import this. Okay, so these are the hooks, and to use these hooks we need to import this from our component, from React actually. Now, and yes, again, this is one of the advantage of using callback function, like functional components basically. So if you're using functional components, so you have hooks. If you are using class components, that then it becomes a bit more messy. And the documentation we are going through in the starting, like suppose state and life cycle, those were the documentation for to manage a state in class. So if still you are a class fan, then you can go there and learn a bit more in deeper. So here we are going to manage with hooks because this is brilliant, and this helps a lot of functionalities to be all together. So the first parameter of hook, now suppose you can also see there in the suggestions, effect, like what kind of callback you want to do, effect callback. And then the last second parameter is React dependencies, like what dependency you want to keep there, like what needs to be changed and so on. So let's write this callback. This is a callback where we are going to do something, right? And the second parameter is the list of dependencies. Note here, dependency list. So how do we define, what data type do we use to define list? Simply array, right? So in array, you can define all the list. So here we are defining something like count. So this will literally listen to this count. If this count is changing something, then this particular code will learn. Again, if this count is going to be changed, like suppose if this data is going to change, if you're tapping something and this data is going to change, then this use effect will run this function. Again, this is dependency, and if this dependency gets changed, then the use effect run these particular callback. Now you can do anything with this callback. Like suppose let's console here, console uh, reached milestone, maybe. So reached milestone, and reached console.log list. Now suppose if this count is going to reached, we can explain like reached 5. Now if this particular, what we want to plan here is, suppose if this count raised to 5, then we want to do this, right? But again, if this count gets changed, then this is going to log. Let me just open my logger first, not mobile this time. And I want my console to be back, not any bad stuff. Okay, see. Now, if okay, so firstly, why this came here, we just reloaded the page, right? So we are going to explain, of course. So now this the count, right? So there is something in the count, and there is one more thing. If you do not put anything in the array, like there is no dependencies, gotta comment how to install React in existing project. I joined late. Okay, you will get to know more in details. One moment, I'm into something. Let me just end this first. Okay, so raised to 5, right? And what is our actual goal? Okay, so as I was in the dependencies, right? So if you put nothing in the dependency, then it get reloads uh, every time you are going to reload the page, or maybe someone is trying to land the page. Like suppose if you want, if someone lands to this page, do something. If you someone's come to this page, do something, then you can and there's sort of a callback, right? You cannot just put that callback right away, but you need to inherit that into this one, right? That is the better way of implementing here. But again, there are a lot of advantages we will get to know. Like maybe suppose this is a page, okay, and you need some user data here, right? And those user data are coming from a certain API, and we are going to build that API. So we are not going to call that API right away in the empty scope, right? We are going to implement this here. Like suppose let the page reload first, and meanwhile also get the data, run this function and fetch the API, get those data, and then print it here. So this use effect literally does that. behind the scene. And then here, if you put certain dependencies, like suppose as we have now count, then these callback is going to run. Now here we just wrote this. So of course, every time this is going to reload, the first time it's going to hit, and then every time this is going to change, like suppose change, 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 and so on. It is going to print every single time. I don't know if you can see or not. This is literally increasing the name. Now this is 10 and so on. So now let's put this to condition. If maybe the count is more than, or maybe the count is equal to 5, then console log this. So now it is not going to print. If you reload the page, this is not going to print. Why? Because this use effect ran, but this condition is not going to apply, and this is the basic JavaScript, of course, you know. So but what we are what we are going to do is we are just going to demonstrate this is short of an event listener, and this count, every time this count is going to be changed, the use effect is literally listening and running this particular callback. Now if we change this to 2 3 4, and the moment I hit 5, this is going to hit this. And again, if you're going to change, this is not going to work. Why? Because the condition was if count is equal to 5. So this is sort of a event listener. If we add certain dependencies here, and again you can add multiple dependencies like count and so on if you have any. And in while that, if you are adding multiple dependencies, so if any of the dependency gets changed, so this callback is going to run. And if you do not put any dependency there, then this is going to run only once when the page reloads. That's it. So this is the game of use effect. Now move forward to more hooks. And again, React hook is you know I don't if you ask any developer who are working from beginning on React, or maybe from 2016 or 17, actually before 18, so most of them still don't know hooks, and they need to advance their knowledge to learn hooks. So but right now you are learning with 17, and actually this hook was launched on 16, and now you're learning with 17 version of React. So and from the basic only you are learning hooks, which is really really great. So now we can move forward to something like okay, we went through use effect, and we can move forward to use context. Okay, this is the thing, use context. Now the use context is, we can I don't know how to illustrate this, but it's basically the parent of user state. And how we can call it parent, as in user state manages state into a single module. Like suppose you, if you're managing this particular state, then this is into these component only, for this particular component, for this particular module. But you cannot export this or use this particular component somewhere else. You cannot do this. If you want to do it, again, as yesterday as we were doing, like passing the props to the another component, like that you can do it. But without passing the props, you cannot use it just right away. So there this use state comes along. What use state does, like suppose we can consider this as in global state management. Suppose our entire application, we have the entire application right now. Into this entire application there should be some data which should be managed from every modules maybe. So as in maybe the if the user has logged in or not. So if the user is directing to the certain navigation which are private in our application, or like on the front end, if it is private, then they cannot redirect to the private application until they have the token on their local, right? Suppose, and how they can get that token if they are successfully logged in from the API, like from the login page. So we are going to wrap this up into the entire application and manage this state. And we are going to hold this state like this particular user is logged in. And we can, and in any module under that application, we can check that the user, but that the particular user has logged in or not, without passing any properties directly to that module. Again, that's going to be a bit more conflict. Let me illustrate this with code. Suppose, okay, now we need index here, and in index we are going to implement this so we understand how we are going to work with use context. So again, you can learn more about it, but there are majorly three type of data in the use context, which are yes, this. So these are like uh, use context. No, not this one. Mm, this is going to be the value. Yes, this one. Okay, this is how we are going to create context, and this is how we are going to use this context. Firstly, this is how we are going to import this. Like suppose here we are going to hold this, right? So and we are using user state, and instead while to get the global state, like what data is there in the global state, we can use this use context, and we can pass the context which will be create this create context. And then there are two more stuff, consumer and the provider. Now consumer and the provider, this has important part, mostly the provider, and sometimes we use consumer, but this also has the important part. So provider, so it's very self-explanatory. Provider is someone who is providing those states. Like suppose the actual wrapper one, the wrapper is holding that particular states, that those values, and then passing to the uh, children's, right? And then these are the consumers. So the children's are basically the consumers. Now we are going to wrap this with the provider, so we don't need to use this consumer. But again, if you're not wrapping with the provider, and if we are using this provider with some in any other way, then we also can use consumer to use this. Again, these are a lot of theories. I know you are just juggling with all of these terminologies, but it's fine. Just listen to this carefully. So your mind needs to grasp this concept. If we start coding, then these kind of theories should pop up with on your mind, that okay, this is this, okay, this was this. I didn't get this. I did not get that at that time, but now I got it, because now we are practicing these particular terminologies on code. Now this is a very simple one, but we can demonstrate is, suppose this is how we are going to create context, and we are providing the default value, and we are going to change this. This is the provider. We are going to wrap the entire application with providers simply, and then we can use this, and this is that application basically. And then this provider is holding the value, and then the way we are going to use in any other places is basically this use context, so on. And what you want to do with this particular use context, this is the theme, and do whatever you want to do. Okay, now I know it's a bit, it's a bit noisy, but let's work with this so we'll understand a bit more deeper. And this is going to take a bit more time than both of them, because this is a bit advanced. So let's do it. Firstly, let's create our uh, providers, maybe or the context and the providers. Of course, we are going to segregate this with different file, but just for the sake of demonstrate, we can do it right away. So my context, no, actually from now only we need to use this in a different file. New file, context.js. Yes, now just simply import from React, and what you are going to import is create context, and we are exporting this from here. Maybe export default the context, but let's define that context first. Or context is const um, my context, which is going to be create context. Simply, this is how we create context. Now this needs a default value, and suppose, okay, let's work with the counter only so we can understand how it is going deeper to the nesting level. So suppose const, or we can also use a state maybe. So simply, and this is going to be the count one, and the initial value is 0, and create context. So this count is the default value, and we are going to import my context. So here we are defining this. These are the context, and this is how we are going to import. And let's do one thing. Let's also define this provider here. That's fine. Okay, so this is how we are going to define this context, and then let's use this. Okay, let's use the provider const. We can also grab this up. Context, which is going to be, we are going to create a component which is going to handle everything. So let's import context only, and here there's my context, which should be in capital, or we can also count context, count context. No, it should be returned in this, and then this, which has 3-step consumer provider display name, which is not so much important. For now, we are going to use this provider, and this under this provider, we are going to have something like child, maybe children, but this is going to use this. Okay, children, and this children is, we are going to come up from where this children is coming up. And now, so as we already had decided how we can decide this value from where this value is coming on, which can literally pass to the all children components or the entire application. We can wrap this provider, we can wrap any application with this provider and into that entire application, to every single module this particular value, and all of these like this value would be counted, and this also could be there. Like this theme context, we are getting the theme, and theme start dark and anything we can use. Okay, now let's provide the value, which is going to be an object like count and set count. Okay, now we are sending this object with count and set count. So in children we need it, and this is the context. So we are importing this context now. Okay, index is not needed, we can use this just right here. And let's first import it. Import this context from the same folder and context. And now this is our application. Let's wrap this application with this. Now, as we were thinking, oh, use state called and user state cannot be. Oh, okay, yeah, sorry, my bad. Now we can put this one as 0. Okay, now we can hold this 0 as in constant or anyway, but that's absolutely fine. So now this children, right? Now see the we are importing a component, and we are covering, we are wrapping up this, we are wrapping up the entire application like this one. there would be multiple components and consider as an entire application for now with this context, right? And how we are going to now, how we are going to use this context is simply using use context. So let's just import use context, and the way we are going to use is uh, for now let's just write data and use context, and which is coming from context. Perfect. Now this, instead of this data, can get something like as we already wrote, count and set count. Again, we are going to come up with all of these theory again, but what this says is count has already been defined. But let's just remove this, and now we are ready to go. There might come up with certain destructure properties and so on. Of course, it's going to throw an error. Cannot destructure property count of object. This is using context provider. Yes, I thought of this. This is going to be a bit more complex. Okay, for now, let's just not make it more complex. Use simple as in the default value with 0. And this is a provider and children and everything. Yes, right. This covering up. Perfect. Now here what we are getting is simply the count, and this use count is not going to work. Just remove this for now. We can remove this and also remove this. Okay, we are facing certain error, I guess. It's not going to work. So in theory, what we are doing here is we are creating a sort of a context here, like with 0, right? We are creating this context, and then we are defining the provider. And whenever we are defining any provider, we define this value, like the default value, what the other resources could have. So this, we are passing this default value here, and then for this default value and this children, of course, wrapping up with this particular children, and this with the for this default value, which we need is here. Like the consumer, like we are wrapping up this, and then here we are getting this consumer, and here this count, like suppose we are using this hook, use state hook, and we are passing this context. Which context? Oh, okay, got the problem. We are actually not passing the context. Exports dot context, and here also exports dot count context. So here we are getting two values, this and this. Context not exported. Okay, context is not exported because we are using something, call it okay. Let's import with an object. Oh, oh. Let's not use it here directly. Here exports dot context works. Doesn't work. Wow. Okay, so let's import an object here, module dot exports, which is going to be an object where count context is there and the context is there. And now we are able to, we are importing from where? Of course, context. This is so weird. This is so weird. We are defining this to data, and then we are exporting this with an object, and then here we are importing this data from context, but it says context is not exported from context, but here we are exporting this context. Weird. Let's just close our this and just run again if it caches something we don't need. Okay, so till now, you any other queries that you want to come up with today? I know you might have because we went through a lot of theories. Okay, this was not actually a theory. Don't paint on my screen, please. Okay, so the error is still there. Okay, if you're coming up, I want to divert my mind. If you have any queries or something, let's just comment down, then we can just go with those. And as usual, yes, last day we were free, but today also we got an error to stop our session maybe because I'm not going to invest much more time on this. We have already exceeded our time. Any queries or anything that we are going to come up today? Okay, so from tomorrow, what we are going to do now, we have defined, of course, use context is not demonstrated properly. So tomorrow, firstly, we are going to demonstrate use state. And then tomorrow, we are going to create a module, the authentication module, like the login and the sign up, of course, for maybe for both for restaurant and for your normal users. And they can literally sign up with a sort of a form, and tomorrow we'll be covering this that authentication, and again there will be we also would be creating some private route where no one can go without the logged in user, and we'll be also using this use context to handle this entire state management all also and also use a state. So now some of you have asked about redux, right? So now see, redux we can use, but now React has more advanced features by themselves, like managing state. Like, why do we use Redux? That we need to understand first. We use Redux to manage the entire state, right? Into that application, we manage the to manage the entire state. We use a state. We use a Redux, but this time we have all of these functionalities like use a state and use context, and again use reducers. We would also come up with those. Tomorrow we also might come up with additional hooks like use reducers and so on. So these are tomorrow also we will be using this use reducer. So we are also using the same fundamentals that redux has to manage this the state in an application. So why do we use redux explicitly? So there is a lot of debate, but again, to my understanding, if you are creating an application which doesn't require much more states, like in a decent level, then of course you should go forward with this your to manage with. You can also you can be dependent on react, but again if you're creating any huge application which manages a lot of data and everything, then you need to manage with redux, because redux literally holds your manage in a single directory, and that is more for huge products, like the huge projects to manage the entire state management. But for now, I guess react already has updated a lot, and tomorrow we will manage this entire state, and if you have used react redux ever, then you would see that there are functionalities which is common in redux, and we are using those redux fundamentals and functionalities into react with use state, use context, and use reducer. So they are literally nowadays they are literally in a level that can manage a state in the entire page without Redux. They are totally independent nowadays. Okay, perfect. Now it looks good. Tomorrow we'll be solving this. And of course, there are many more things for tomorrow. Now you have any queries or something? Looks good. Okay, perfect. Where is our host today? Okay, we have already dropped our your attendance link and the Telegram link. If you have any more, like suppose if you're coding and then you are getting more queries or something, then again go forward and join the Telegram link. There are a lot of stuff going on, like we are resolving many more stuffs and something. You can be there, and attendance link for sure to mark your attendance.
Yeah, thank you, sir, for the session. I hope every one of us have grabbed some of the learning from you today. So I'm ending the session over here. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone.